Is it a bird? No. Is it a plane? No. It's Tariff Man. Tariff Man is more powerful than a locomotive, faster than a speeding bullet, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Tariff Man is more powerful than Batman, Captain America, and Superman combined.
So hopefully you liked my little intro there. I recorded it now, so every time we have a tariff news update with the US, and I suspect that there will be a lot more tariff news updates, and I'm going to explain why. There's been in the last 10 days, there's been a number of stories out on trade. People are well aware of the U.S. versus China trade war escalating. It's more than just a trade war now. It's an economic war. It's a Cold War. It may even be more than that. Recently this week, China was supposed to visit American farms, I think in Montana and maybe elsewhere. Those trips were canceled because Trump wants a complete trade deal. I think it's more than just President Trump. I think, and I will explain why, I will lay out the case. In fact, I'm going to play you guys about 9 minutes of clips from a speech that geopolitical strategist, very well respected Peter Zeihan, Zeihan, gave in the last couple weeks. I listened to it and I found it. And I think it will get you guys to the exact place of understanding who is really, besides just Trump, who is running things in terms of U.S. trade policy and how he really thinks. The information in this speech is going to be really, really good. But first, let me talk about the current events, and then I'll play some of the clips and I'll analyze it. You're not going to get this information anywhere else, at least not for free. Okay, so in the last 10 days, like I said, there's been some very interesting news stories about trade that a lot of people are not covering. The World Trade Organization, which China joined in the early 2000s under President Bill Clinton. The rules have changed with the World Trade Organization. Trump was supposed to not be able to issue tariffs, and the rules are constantly changing with that. So if you guys want to go back into the archives, in 2017, shortly after President Trump's inauguration, I interviewed Paul Craig Roberts, and he was screaming at me that the World Trade Organization rules prohibited President Trump from putting any tariffs on China or anyone else. And I was like, rule number one is politicians change the rules. So if there's a powerful government throughout history, whether it's a king or an empire or, with the Roman Senate, what they would do, whoever was in power would change the rules. That is a key tenet throughout history. It's extremely common. The more you study history, the more you'll recognize that trend, is that whether it's the King of England who wants to get a divorce, and so he leaves the Catholic Church, or, plenty of other examples throughout history. There's just tons of them. So the WTO, World Trade Organization, allowed the U.S. to hit the European Union with tariffs over Airbus subsidies. So Airbus, which is a big competitor with Boeing, Airbus was being subsidized by European governments. So Washington is a World Trade Organization dispute settlement panel on Friday, so September 14th. Oh no, this was September 13th. This story came out September 14th. So it was Friday, September 13th, sent the confidential ruling to the European Commission and the United States Trade Representative that the European Union is allowed to billions of euros in punitive tariffs. The United States has won the right to hit the European Union with billions of euros in punitive tariffs by winning a dispute over subsidies to aerospace giant Airbus, four European Union officials told Politico. And the World Trade Organization dispute settlement panel on Friday, September 13th, sent the confidential ruling to the European Commission and the United States Trade Representatives, the official said. Washington has previously announced that it would follow through with tariffs if it won the case in Geneva, and has prepared a list of EU products ranging from cheeses to Airbus planes and parts that it said it would hit with tariffs of up to 100%. The ruling ends a decades-long dispute on whether European Union countries illegally subsidize Airbus planes by granting subsidized loans known as, quote, launch aid and other advantages. Quote, the WTO decision is neither public nor authorized for release. We do not comment on rumors on a report that is not public, an Airbus spokesman said. A spokesman for the European Commission said Brussels would, quote, not comment on leaks, but said it has communicated to the United States that the European Union is ready to work on a fair and balanced solution for our respective aircraft industries. So the U.S. is trying to protect its own large corporations like Boeing, which manufactures aircrafts, military, etc. And this is all part of the stupidity, the mistakes, a lot of the stupid mistakes that are being repeated by all these major governments from the 1920s and 1930s, beggar thy neighbor policy, which is currency wars and trade wars. So President Trump and his top trade representative, who is Bob Lighthizer, someone you want to understand who he is 71 years old according to Wikipedia, from Ohio. Robert Lighthizer, Lighthizer, if you want to look him up. I suggest if you want to go in depth, you can look up his name and China, and it shows that he was warning people before WTO was even drafted that China should never go into the WTO. And a lot of these articles, and there's a lot of good articles from the mainstream media about Lighthizer, called him a curmudgeon, saying that he was Chicken Little. He was warning people that China would cheat, that China would never follow any of the WTO rules, etc., etc. And for a while, no one, he was really the only voice in Washington, D.C. that was related to trade out of all the major names that was questioning China being in the WTO and was saying they're still violating trade, all the problems. He just got voiced out. Probably because the Chinese government was bribing a lot of think tanks, trade officials. They were donating a lot of lobbying dollars. I even heard rumors from a number of sources that Bill Clinton, while he was in the White House, President Bill Clinton was getting checks to make sure that China got into the World Trade Organization. So not only did large corporations want to offshore or outsource, hire salary workers and improve their profits to China, but the trade-off, it backfired, is they had all their technology and intellectual property and research development stolen. So if you go back and look through Bob Lighthizer's comments, he was one of the few people that's consistently, since the Ronald Reagan administration, and I believe he was the first drafter of the World Trade Organization, he was one of the few people that has been fighting for American workers for a long time. Even more, I would say, than a lot of the union people. He's been trying to protect jobs. So I'm going to play a clip here from Peter Zeihan. This first clip is going to run about 7 minutes long, and I think it's important, so that's why I'm going to play the clip. It's on a YouTube video on a speech. The speech will be, after the show's over, the link to the whole speech. It's about an hour long. It's a keynote speech from a recent conference. If you want to listen to the whole speech, if not, I've summarized it down to about 10 minutes that I think is important for the show. So let me play the clip here explaining from a key geopolitical strategist who gets paid a lot of money to analyze things about why Bob Lighthizer is so important and why he has so much power in the Trump administration. In fact, there was an article that said Bob Lighthizer may have the most power of any of Trump's advisors. So I'll let Peter Zeihan explain this now.
Now, the person you need to watch most is not Donald Trump. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's entertaining. But this is the guy who's making the real decisions. This is Robert Lighthizer. He's the U.S. Trade Representative, and he is responsible for the negotiation and enforcement of every trade deal on the books in the United States. He's been a very busy boy of late. Now, this is not his first stint in government. Lighthizer used to work for Reagan. You guys remember the Plaza Accords, 1985? Quick war story. So back during the first Reagan term, the Reagan administration noticed that a lot of the allies were doing things that we weren't really fans of. For example, the French, the Germans, the Brits, the Japanese, they were all intervening in currency markets, pushing down the cost of their currency in order to boost exports to the American system. Reagan saw this, found it distasteful, but the Cold War was running hot and heavy. He didn't want to rock the boat. He needed the allies all lined up on security issues. So he looked the other way. But by the time we got to 1984, things had changed. Reagan would never face another election. Gorbachev was rising to power, and the Cold War was warming up. So the Reagan team pulled the allies together at the Plaza Hotel in New York and says, look, we see what you're doing. You're going to stop. You're going to stop today, because if you don't, we will pull out of the global order, and you can deal with the Russians by yourself, because we now have a side deal. It worked. The intervention didn't just stop, it reversed. Within 6 months, the US dollar had dropped by half. Lighthizer was the Reagan administration's hatchet man assigned to Tokyo to make sure the Japanese did not renege on the deal. And whenever he got his marching orders, he would walk into the Ministry of Finance, lay out the American position, and And then when the Japanese were issuing the rebuttal, he would take off his translator microphone, disassemble it on the desk in front of him, have a little G.I. Joe with the war with the pieces, pew, pew. When the Japanese were done, he'd reassemble it, put it back on, and say, well, that was absolutely riveting, but we're going to do it my way, right? He doesn't negotiate, he imposes. He makes sure that he holds all the cards, and then he just goes. So far, he has concluded deals with South Korea, with Mexico, with Canada, with Japan, and will probably have a bare bones, if not a complete deal with the United Kingdom done by the end of the year. Those 5 are all the United States is concerned with, because those 5 represent a majority of the American trade portfolio. There is not going to be a deal with China. There is not going to be a deal with Europe, which means the tariff levels that are in place today are the new floor for international trade. No order, and if you don't have a specific deal with the United States, no security. And that's just the start of the conversation. There are 4 big tools that Lighthizer is bringing to bear. Number 1, energy. The United States becomes a net oil exporter this year. It is already a net exporter of every other energy product that humans use. I urge you to think of stability in the international energy markets as no longer in American interests. Because in an environment where the global system is disrupted, the United States is not. And it gives every American corporate power a competitive leg up on everybody else. I strongly urge you to look at American foreign policy in places like Iran and Venezuela in that light. Disruption is now good for business. Next up, steel and aluminum and automotive. For those of you who have been following the trade talks, you may have noticed that these details, steel, aluminum, automotive, are not included in any of the trade deals. That is so Lighthizer has them in his back pocket, and he can pull them out at any time to shape any negotiation he wants. In addition, it's not limited to trade. Trump has them in his back pocket and uses them to force compliance on whatever issue he wants, even if it has nothing to do with goods exchange. And then finally, the currency market. Now, you guys deal with almost an exclusively dollarized product, so this is probably a little bit out of your bailiwick, but I urge you to consider how trade actually works from a currency point of view. Let's say you've got a load of Korean electronics that are being sold to the Brazilians. The Koreans do not get paid in won because nobody in Brazil has or wants won. And they don't get paid in Brazilian reals because no one in Korea has or wants reals. So what happens is the Brazilians pay in their local currency, the real. It's converted to US dollars on a secondary exchange, and then it's reconverted into won, which are given to the Koreans. It's a 3-step process with the dollar in the middle. Roughly 95% of global trade uses this mechanism. Under Obama, the last round of Iran sanctions were expressly designed to interrupt that intermediate step so that individual transactions or individual corporations could be blocked. What Trump has done is taken a scalpel and turned it into a machete so that it can cut out not just companies, but countries. And these sanctions have already been threatened against NATO allies. And Lighthizer is chomping at the bit to throw that against China. Because if this tool comes into play, you don't simply lose access to the American market, you lose access to all international trade. And the biggest problem the Chinese have right now is that this is the guy in charge. Foreign policy debate within the administration right now falls into 2 rough camps. In camp number 1, led by Lighthizer, you have a belief that the global system is flawed and out of date, and so if it has to be brought to secure some sort of national interest, so be it. In the second basket, the global order itself is seen as part of the problem and that it should be taken down regardless of what else happens. In this sort of environment, it's just a question of timing before the whole thing comes crashing down. All right. Let's talk about your world more specifically. Now, this is the private capital curve.
Okay, so I think I played enough of that clip. There's one more clip I want you guys to listen to really quick. Let me get it up here, and I'll talk while I'm finding it here on my YouTube, moving it up here. But I would just say that Lighthizer is a badass. He is a bad mamma jamma. He is very good with negotiating. He plays hardball. He likes hardball. If you have read the book Aftermath from if you have read the book Aftermath from Jim Rickards, there is an excellent story in there about how the first meeting after Trump was inaugurated, that Lighthizer showed up in the meeting with Chinese trade negotiators. He had no notes, and China thought, okay, Trump was just saying all this populist stuff just to get elected. It's going to be status quo, business as usual. Trump's going to back down. He's going to concede. And Lighthizer, this is from the Jim Rickards book, I believe, that Lighthizer just hits the Chinese with 25 ways that they've lied, cheated, and violated the WTO rules and have never complied. And the Chinese trade negotiators, were just flabbergasted. They were totally shocked when Lighthizer just said, and Lighthizer didn't have notes because he had created the World Trade Organization Charter. So he knew it forward, backward, and sideways. The guy knows what he's talking about with the WTO rules, and he just blasted the Chinese in trade negotiations, and the Chinese were shocked, and the Chinese said, oh my God, we are in trouble. We have to totally change all of our strategy. And this would probably, my educated guess, this would be why Lighthizer is the one who does not want to compromise with China at all. Lighthizer is the one. Lighthizer has said publicly that he's willing to give China some incremental things, but only if they behave. But he will not have any type of a compromised trade deal because he does not trust the Chinese. He has been saying for many, many years, since China was allowed into the WTO, when Bill Clinton was in the White House and Bill Clinton refused to listen to Bob Lighthizer, that the Chinese would cheat and that the Chinese would use getting into WTO to their advantage and cheat and not follow any of the rules. So the Chinese, if they are going to wait things out, Bob Lighthizer would be one of the guys they want gone. He is really shrewd. He plays hardball. He cares about American workers. And if you can listen to what Peter Zeihan said more closely, go back and listen to it again maybe later, he said that he suspects that there won't be any trade deals with China and any trade deals with the European Union, and he thinks that Trump may even take Chinese banks out of SWIFT soon. And that Trump is threatening to do that out of the global economy or out of SWIFT with even NATO allies. So crazy stuff. Go back and listen to what I'm not sure if I agree with everything Zeihan said, but Trump is he's weaponized these tariffs. So they're leverage for other negotiations. So look what Trump did with Mexico. Trump said, if you're not going to help us with the problems on our southern border, we're going to put tariffs on you. And so Mexico got 30,000 of their military, right, to stop the immigration from other Latin American countries through Mexico to the U.S.'s southern border. So he's weaponized them. Also, another story, guys, that came out on September 16th, Fortune covered this, the Wall Street Journal as well. European Union luxury brands are facing WTO-approved U.S. tariffs now. So this is a situation, guys. Remember, the U.S., according to Paul Craig Roberts and the original laws, the United States was not supposed to be able to put any tariffs on anyone in the WTO or out of anyone in the WTO's goods. So the U.S. was not, until the U.S. got the rules changes, the U.S. was not supposed to put any tariffs on anyone else's goods. But we are heading, it goes back to the people in power changing the rules to fit their needs. This is common throughout history. And the people say otherwise, you haven't studied history enough. You haven't looked at different empires, different monarchies or governments. It's extremely common. And then also back to the same mistakes from the 1920s and 30s, where all these countries are in a currency war. They're all trying to debase their currency. The European Central Bank is trying to massively do QE, devalue the euro. Look at the dollar index. The dollar is at 98.62. It's up. Gold is also up. Gold closed at 1524.40 in US dollars. So the dollar index is still held above 98. And that, to me, guys, says that weak euro, because most of the dollar index is out of the euro. So Trump sees that, and Trump is trying to partially offset a weaker euro with the tariffs. Now, I'm not, as an Austrian school economist, I don't like this, but I see why Trump and other people are trying to do it. So I'm just giving you analysis of the reality. As an Austrian school economist, someone that would like more free markets, I don't like this, but this is not the world we live in. We live in a world now where countries, especially the larger countries, are routinely repeating the same mistakes of the 1920s and 30s, beggar thy neighbor, currency war, and trade war or tariff policy. So Trump is going to use tariffs to offset the European Union trying to devalue the euro against the dollar. Crazy stuff. So these luxury brands, it looks like the panel on Friday, so that was the 13th as well. The range of goods worth $5 billion to $7 billion per year, far less than the $11 billion Trump had threatened. And let me see, some of the European luxury fashion, spirit, champagne companies will likely be charging higher for exports to America. If you want to read the full story, I have the link to the article. You can take a look. So this used to be illegal to do that, and miraculously the rules got changed. A weaker dollar helps export. No, that's the neo-mercantilist views. The neo-mercantilist views is if you weaken your currency, it helps with everything. Also, what I would go back and listen to what Zeihan said was that Lighthizer, under Ronald Reagan, he put up tariffs to get countries like Japan to move their manufacturing of Toyotas and other things, and also German automobiles, here to the United States. So that's why you have Toyota factories in states like Tennessee, you have BMW factories in South Carolina, you have car factories of quality luxury automobiles in Alabama, and that's why you have those, is because of Lighthizer doing those things. He put the tariffs up so high that it forced those manufacturers to move their factories to the U.S., creating American jobs, and those jobs have not left. So I think Lighthizer, he cares about the United States. I don't think you can argue with that. I think he cares first and foremost about the United States. And Trump really is in tight with Lighthizer. I believe that whenever Trump goes on vacation down to Florida for a weekend or something, that Lighthizer flies on Air Force One with him, because Lighthizer has retired around Mar-a-Lago now. So Bob Lighthizer is other than Trump, Bob Lighthizer he may be the most powerful advisor in the Trump administration, and he does not want compromise on these trade deals. He wants to protect American workers. So let me play the last couple minutes here of the Peter Zeihan speech. A listener in the audience asked a question, I think, about China, so I'll play this here too.
Company. So we have Robert Lighthizer, chief negotiator, working for a guy that wrote The Art of the Deal. How's this play out? Our stock market, a lot of volatility, yet we're still double compared to when he took over. How's this play out over the next, let's say, 6 years?
Okay. I'm glad you said 6 years instead of 6 months. Yeah, tactical stock stuff, I don't do that. Lighthizer is the guy who wrote the WTO charter, so he knows exactly where to put the knives in order to cause as much pain for whoever's across the table as possible. He's done a fairly good job of it. Lighthizer is also the only person in the Trump administration that Trump actually gives leeway and free rein to. There's an incredible amount of trust between those two. Probably a year from now, Lighthizer will be the only member of Trump's cabinet who was there at the beginning. Everybody else has been cycled out. So Korea, that one is already done and ratified. Mexico and Canada, that will be ratified later this year. Japan was just completed, will probably be ratified later this year. The United Kingdom negotiations are going to be a little more interesting because Lighthizer first has to break the British will to live before he signs the deal, but that won't take any more than 8 months. That's all of them. The rest of it, everything else that is on Lighthizer's plate is sheer fun. So he can't wait to treat the Chinese like he really wants to. He just wants to get the British thing taken care of first. And then the European Union is next. So we're going to see a broad breakdown in trade relations in the best case scenario across both oceans. That's assuming all these other issues that I've been discussing don't overtake events. But we are looking at the collapse of the global order from both an institutional point of view and a day-to-day economic point of view. So if you are one of those companies that still has a lot of manufacturing in China, I mean, A, you've got to assume at this point that every technical secret you have has already been stolen. B, as soon as the extradition law in Hong Kong goes formal, the Chinese are going to start arresting executives, foreign executives, because the extradition law doesn't just apply to mainlanders or to Chinese citizens in Hong Kong, it applies to everyone. And third, if you can even put up with that, you're going to have to start actively participating in Chinese propaganda on everything, regardless of if it deals with the Chinese military, the American military, things like Tiananmen Square, whatever it happens to be. That is going to be the bar that you're going to have to pass to remain a presence in the People's Republic. So with that sort of risk, I mean, it's not even about reputation at this point. It's about whether or not your companies can even function as a national, or as a global whole. We're going into a renationalization of the global trading network. Samsung has given us an incredible insight as to how you can do that. Samsung used to be one of the countries that was, or companies, excuse me, that was most invested in the mainland China. And then there was a nationalist spat between South Korea and China about 2012. And Samsung started diversifying away. 5 years on, less than 1 in 10 of their inputs actually come from the mainland anymore. So it can be done. It can be done quickly, but it does require a certain mindset shift. Something to consider is that most independent studies say that today, because of cost increases in China, regulatory increases in China, and especially the demographic change in China, you can build most things outside of China for the same price that you can build them inside once you have paid for the sunk cost of the industrial development. And I realize that that number is not zero. But this is not a broad-scale economic collapse. In the next 6 years, your time frame, this process, at least as far as North America is concerned, is going to be completed because the capital is there, the labor structure is mostly there, and the skilled labor structure is going to be coming anyway. So we're going to get through this. It's not a straight line. There are a lot of bumps along the way, and Donald Trump loves his Twitter account. But over the long term, this looks pretty good.
Okay, so I forgot to mention this earlier when Zeihan, if you go back and listen to it, Zeihan also mentioned that Bob Lighthizer also was involved in the Plaza Accords. So the Plaza Accords, if you're not familiar, was where the US dollar got too strong and it had to be devalued because there was too much dollar-denominated debt back then. The Plaza Accords were, I believe, in the 1990s. So we could have a similar situation play out now with too much dollar-denominated debt, especially in China, especially in emerging markets, and the dollar, because it is not devaluing, that dollar-denominated debt becomes onerous. So Lighthizer seems to be the guy there. Now, go back and listen, if you didn't hear it initially, to what Zeihan said about how much the dollar had to be devalued, though, to help with some U.S. exports and also help with the dollar devalued debt that these other countries had. The full speech, guys, will be at the end of the video. I'll put the full speech, keynote speech from Peter Zeihan. It's for free on YouTube. It has, let me see how many views it has. It has around 30,000 views right now. I'll put it at the end of this video after the show's over. So someone told me to look out for his work in the last couple months, and I found something and I thought it was good, and I showed you guys about 8 or 9 minutes worth of very interesting clips that I think are important related to the Trump administration's trade strategy. So if Zeihan is correct, and if the analysis that Jim Rickards talked about with the story about Lighthizer is correct, and if people have Lighthizer understood correctly, it sounds like Lighthizer does not want any trade deals with the European Union or China, that he just wants to stick it to them with more and more tariffs. So if you want to read more about the tariffs that the U.S. got the rules changes to do on European Union goods, I have the links to the couple articles. Other than that, I think I'm pretty much done with all the stuff the main stuff I wanted to talk about. I have a list of the Trump tariffs too from Wikipedia if you want to take a look. But Bob Lighthizer, besides Trump, Bob Lighthizer is the main guy. And Lighthizer is so good at knowing what the WTO charter is, the WTO trade rules, that after those negotiations with China the first time, President Trump was so impressed, the feedback he heard, that it had really knocked China back, that the U.S. had gained a lot of leverage in that Trump asked Lighthizer for a copy of his notes with all the 25 violations that China had done to the WTO rules, and Lighthizer said, "I don't have a copy of the notes, I had them all memorized." So Lighthizer knows the information because he helped write the WTO charter, and he's been warning people in the Washington, D.C., both political parties, for years about China and why they shouldn't have been allowed to join the WTO, and largely he was ignored for decades. And yeah, I would say largely he was ignored for decades. All fiat currencies are bubbles too. So there's a lot of problems in the global economy. No, Lighthizer is no clown. Lighthizer, the Chinese fear Lighthizer, which is why China would want to wait things out. Lighthizer is no clown, which is why, in my opinion, China would want to wait Trump and Lighthizer out. Wait until after the 2020 election, and I'm sure the Chinese would hope and pray that Trump does not get a second term. The World Trade Organization is now the World Tariff Organization. Well, it was not supposed to be that way, but here you have examples of the European Union using subsidies, which violated the World Trade Organization, and the U.S. now using tariffs, retaliatory tariffs. And now this is what's going back to neo-mercantilist policies and beggar thy neighbor and currency wars and trade wars and tariff policies from the 1920s and 30s, where all these countries are fighting over a shrinking global economic pie. So I believe, in my educated guess, was that Lighthizer was the one who does not want a compromised China deal. So even if the Chinese are hurting and the Chinese want a deal, Lighthizer, in my opinion, Lighthizer is the one saying no deal. Lighthizer, he has at least 20 or 30 years of anger and frustration at the Chinese. If you read the book from Peter Schweitzer called America's Secret Empires, Schweitzer talks about how the Chinese have been writing a lot of checks, bribing politicians in both political parties, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Joe Biden and his family, or people in think tanks or trade negotiators. It's been going on, the corruption and bribery with the Chinese government to the U.S., the key officials, to prevent any change in trade policy. Because over the years here in the United States, for a long time, there's been some politicians that have done rhetoric threatening to change the trade policy in China. But then once they come here to Washington, D.C., there's no changes. No one tries. It did not change until Trump. So after China joined the World Trade Organization, there was no dramatic change whatsoever to trade policy with China until Trump was elected. Grace says 20 plus years will make someone really, really angry. Yes, he was ignored. He was ignored for 20 years. They called him names. He didn't get as many jobs. He didn't get as many consulting gigs. He was called a curmudgeon, a chicken little. He was called all kinds of names. And a lot of the stuff he predicted has come true. Yes, Lighthizer, this Res Exilium says Lighthizer is the only Trump official that has relative autonomy, never speaks in public, and has been able to be consistent in confronting China. Yep, I agree. I've read similar reports, and from other people I've spoken to, whether it's in Jim Rickards' book or other people I've spoken to here around the Washington, D.C. metro area, I've heard the same thing. But there are a lot of stories on Robert Lighthizer in the mainstream media talking about he's one of the most, if not the most powerful Trump advisor. Ricky says, tariffs are not good for anyone, but when your partners don't trade on an even footing, you're backed into a corner. Well, here's the thing. Everyone's trying to devalue their currency. All these central banks are trying to lower interest rates, trying to do QE, and so tariffs are going to be weaponized. Now, other countries were using tariffs on American goods for a long time, and the U.S. did not have, on a lot of imported goods, tariffs. There was tariffs on some goods, but not nearly as many as other countries. I believe like motorcycles into like Harley-Davidson motorcycles into Vietnam and Thailand and some other countries, there's over 100% or more tariffs. So there's never been a level playing field. There's no such thing as free trade. It's all bullshit. Anyone who's labeled like a free trade deal, like the North American Free Trade Deal, it was 10,000 pages of legislation, the North American Free Trade Deal. there was all these loopholes and subsidies to American companies, and it was all BS. As someone who likes limited government and free markets, I can tell you the reality is that there's never really been much of that, especially when people blame capitalism and free trade for the problems that we have now. Well, we haven't had real capitalism, and we definitely haven't had free trade for a very, very long time, if ever. Yeah, Bob Lighthizer does very few interviews, from what it sounds like. He's not like Larry Kudlow or some of the other talking heads that come out. And I don't think Bob Lighthizer cares. He's one of the few people that I've seen from reading his comments. He's one of the few, and his policy ideas. He's one of the very few people that actually truly cares about American workers. That he's been fighting to try to get jobs here to the U.S. or keep them here for a very, very long time. He does not get any credit for that. You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed the show. So if you missed the Peter Zeihan clips that I played, about the 8 or 9 minutes, you can go back and listen to the show after this is over, or I will put a link to the Peter Zeihan keynote speech at the end of this video after it's done rendering. So there's going to be a lot more tariffs. There's going to be a lot more back and forth. The currency wars, the trade wars, monetary policy, a lot of the same stupid mistakes from the 20s and 30s. And on the U.S. side, guys, at least on the U.S. side, I would expect, as long as Lighthizer's there, he does not want to deal with China. That's what, the more I study this, the more I'm convinced that Lighthizer, even if Trump wants a compromise, he wants to say he got a deal done for the 2020 election, Lighthizer's the one saying, no way. Oh, only 50 likes? Yeah, I mean, if you go back through history, eventually in the 20s and 30s, that led to World War II. I don't know about World War III. I think it's more likely that we have a lot more cybersecurity incidents, really bad ones, where power grids or power stations, power plants are taken down, other things. People go after stock markets in different countries. There's already been some of those incidents, but I think it could escalate. So thank you very much to my almost 150 Patreon account contributors. I picked up a couple more in the last couple days. Someone was very kind and put $20 per month. That's absolutely superb. Hopefully I'll get, before my birthday, in less than 2 weeks, it's 13 days from now, hopefully I will get up to 150 or more. Things are really rolling. I don't think I'm going to get to 30,000 subscribers before my birthday, but I'm really happy I got over 5 million views before my birthday. That was a goal of mine. And thank you to my almost a dozen monthly PayPal account contributors. So things are really starting to roll. I can focus on making quality content for you guys, where I play video clips and show you guys the analysis that elite level researchers and analysts would do. So I think that's good to end this on right now. I don't see any super chats. No, I don't see any super chats. That's fine. Everyone have a nice rest of your weekend. And if there's any more news, like more repo madness, the repo madness totals, guys, if you total it all out, I saw someone run the numbers through October 10th. It's looking like way over $1 trillion. So maybe I should record another Crazy Eddie style repo madness commercial, funny commercial, because I know you guys like that. Maybe I should do another one. Okay, well, bye for now. Thank you, and everyone have a nice weekend, and I appreciate you guys listening and hitting the like button, and I'm going to keep growing this content out and giving you guys the best information and analysis possible.